Modern relationships can get pretty complicated, and the lines can feel a little blurry. But when it comes to the law, those lines are razor sharp, and they have massive consequences. Today, we're going to look at one of those critical legal lines drawn in a real-life court case. So, what's the big question we're tackling? It's this. When does a couple who's just living together get the same legal protections as a married couple? It's a question that affects millions of people, and as you're about to see, the answer is way more specific than you might think.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at why the law doesn't treat all live-in relationships the same. Then, we'll dive right into a real case where a relationship was put on trial. After that, we'll unpack the strict 5-point test the court used, see what the final verdict was, and then we'll talk about what this all means for everyone else.
Let's start with a really important piece of the puzzle. India's Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act from 2005. Now, this law gives people some really crucial protections. But here's the catch. It doesn't just apply to any couple living under the same roof. It's designed for a very particular kind of relationship.
The whole legal fight really hangs on this one specific term, domestic relationship. The law says the couple has to either be married or in a relationship in the nature of marriage. And that one phrase, in the nature of marriage, is exactly where our whole story really gets started.
Okay, so enough with the theory. Let's see how this stuff actually plays out in the real world. We're looking at a case that went all the way to the Bombay High Court, Deepak versus Sonia. And this isn't some hypothetical classroom example. This is a story about two people, two kids, and two totally different versions of the truth.
So on one side, you've got Sonia. She says they were in a serious, long-term relationship. They lived together, they acted like a married couple, they even had 2 daughters. But she said he became abusive after their first child was born. Then you have Deepak's version. He says, whoa, not so fast. Sonia was just an employee at his wife's company. He was already married, and Sonia knew it the whole time. He didn't see it as a marriage-like relationship at all, but as an affair.
So at first, the lower courts heard both sides, and they found Sonia's story more convincing. They sided with her. They ordered Deepak to start paying monthly maintenance for her and for their 2 daughters. But this story was far from over. Deepak appealed, and the case went to a higher court.
And this is where things get really interesting. The High Court didn't just listen to the stories again. Nope, they pulled out a strict legal formula, a kind of rule book, from a famous Supreme Court case called Velusamy. This is basically the official checklist for deciding if a relationship is truly in the nature of marriage.
So what is this test? Well, it's a 5-point checklist. And here's the kicker. You have to meet all 5 conditions. 1. You have to present yourselves to the world as if you're married. 2. You both have to be old enough to legally get married. 3. You have to be legally qualified to marry each other. 4. You have to have lived together for a good while. And 5. You have to have shared a home. It's an all-or-nothing kind of deal.
And remember that third point on the list, the one about being qualified to marry? Well, that turned out to be the absolute game changer in this case, because the law is crystal clear on this. To be qualified to marry, you both have to be unmarried. If one person is already legally married to someone else, the test fails, period.
Okay, so the High Court has this 5-point test in hand. Now comes the moment of truth. How did this checklist apply to the very messy, conflicting stories of Deepak and Sonia? The judges started sifting through all the evidence, checking off each box. As the court started digging, some pretty telling details came to light. Turns out, Sonia was actually hired by Deepak's wife. In fact, she was introduced to Deepak by his wife. The court also pointed out that Deepak was 46 when this all started, so it was pretty unlikely he was single. But here was the most critical piece of all. Sonia never really explained why she didn't just, ask him if he was married.
In fact, the judge didn't mince words. Justice Taliani wrote that Sonia had, and this is a direct quote, schemingly kept silence about whether she'd looked into Deepak's marital status. The court basically interpreted her silence as proof that she probably knew the answer all along.
And just like that, it was over. Because Deepak was already married, their relationship failed point 3 of that crucial test. They were not legally qualified to marry. And because they failed that one single point, the High Court threw out the lower court's rulings completely.
The real-world impact of that decision was huge, and it was immediate. All those maintenance orders? Canceled. The 7,000 rupees a month for Sonia and the 6,500 for each of their daughters, all of it was stopped. So, you might be thinking, okay, that's one couple's story, but why does it matter to the rest of us?
Well, because this verdict does way more than just settle a fight between two people. It draws a really clear line in the sand. It shows us that the Domestic Violence Act isn't some catch-all protection for every couple that lives together. It has very specific rules.
But here's a really important legal twist. Even though Sonia lost her case under the Domestic Violence Act, the court pointed out something interesting. There might be another legal door open for her daughters. A totally different law, one that's all about financial support for children, could still apply to them. So the big lesson here is that losing under one law doesn't mean it's the end of the road, especially for the kids involved.
So what's the bottom line here? The court drew a very firm line. It said that the Domestic Violence Act is there to protect real, genuine marriage-like partnerships. It is not there, according to this ruling, to protect relationships where one person is already married to someone else, what the law considers a bigamous relationship.
And all of this leaves us with a huge question, doesn't it? In a world where relationships are constantly changing, does a strict 5-point checklist like this still make sense? Does it hit the right balance between protecting people who are vulnerable while also setting clear legal boundaries? It's a really tough question right at the intersection of our laws and our modern lives.